Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we're going to look at two different but similarly themed microbrand timepieces that are smaller wearing and sleek enough for everyday casual wear while still being capable enough for your dedicated adventures. I'd say these do, of course, I think fall into other categories as well. One in the dive watch category, dedicated. The other one in more of a field watch or aviation watch, pilot's watch, dedicated as well. But I think they kind of both fall into that everyday adventure watch where you're just going to want something that's sporty, legible, and tough. We have two very different watches again, but similarly themed, and they kind of accomplish similar things at two very different price points, as well as two different very different types of brands. One is a collab with AVI-8. A little about AVI-8 here on the left. They're a sister brand to Spinnaker, but instead of nautical and diver-oriented themes, AVI-8 focuses on aviation and pilot-style watches. This is their covert model, which is actually a collaboration they did with Worn and Wound. And then on the other side, you do have the Dievas, which is a company that was founded in 2006. They're a younger German brand, now approaching 20 years of experience building low volume, high value tool watches that innovate and resonate with watch collectors and connoisseurs worldwide. This is their Vortex 39 Ti for titanium, and it's the latest evolution of their signature model engineered for professionals operating across land, sea, and air, now reimagined in a more compact form. Now, the AVI-8 goes for $450, so just under $500, while the Dievas, which is, it's a made in German brand, so that's going to go for $1420, and it's available from Nomen Watches, which is an authorized dealer of theirs. The diver on the right-hand side is going to be at 39.5 millimeters, which is, I think pretty tidy for a dive watch, while the covert is at 37.8 millimeters in diameter. Both of them are relatively thin, and I think they do offer a lot for, not a lot of money when you start comparing them to some of the other options within these respective spaces. So with that said, let's go ahead and zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, now both of these are on the smaller side, but at the same time, they're both on the more capable side. You have, of course, a dive watch here with a hardened titanium, and then we have a pilot's watch with a hardened steel, which I think is great that both of them are offering that, things like sapphire crystals, higher beat rates here, both of them beating at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour. Of course, one's going to be more expensive, so it's going to get you that Sellita SW200, whereas the other is going to be a little bit more affordable, packing that Miyota 9015. But yeah, I think, when you look at the monochromatic colorways, the offset crowns and everything, you can see that there's a lot, although these are two very different watches, they share a lot of attributes, whether it be kind of the 3D indices there, whereas here, of course, with the more expensive package, you're going to get 3D lume blocks versus here 3D indices that are painted or coated with lume. They do both have that offset date, so you have the full index all the way around. And then, and even in terms of their profiles, they actually both do have matte blasted finishes. Here you have matte blasted, but you also get satin brushed as well as high polish, versus here, fully matte blast finish. You're also going to get that kind of monochromatic black and metal look, with, of course, a couple of pops of red here and there. And again, the really nice tidy sizes, 37.8 millimeters in diameter versus 39.5. And again, I think that's really, really cool. And these are two packages that do pack a lot of punch, again, at very different price points. Of course, AVI-8 is known for being a very, very affordable brand, even amongst other contemporaries within the space, whereas Dievas is definitely targeted more towards being, value forward, but more so in comparison to other German brands, and not necessarily in line to trying to compete with your average everyday micro brands that are going to be, heavily, sourced in terms of parts and everything in Asia. Not to say that this made in German piece, made in Germany piece doesn't have any types of Asian parts contained, because it would be silly to think that. But again, there is going to be a bit of a premium that comes with that. Also, full titanium construction, hardened titanium at that. You're also going to get a fantastic, you can see there, if I can, let me get it to focus. There we have it. Check it out. You're going to get a nice toolless micro adjusting clasp as well. So there's a lot of goodies here. There's a lot to like. Very nice bezel action as well. You're getting ceramic bezel insert. You're getting a lot of loom here as well. So there's a lot to like with either of these, even down to, look at that fully articulated bracelet there in terms of the links. So very nice. But hey, this is no slouch, and a lot of the times you don't necessarily need all of this. It's nice, don't get me wrong, but something like this, of course, is going to be a bit more versatile, because of course it's tough enough for those dedicated adventures, but also I think refined and versatile enough. I think leaning a little bit more versatile versus full-on sportiness, because it does have a 20 millimeter. Well, they both have 20 millimeter lugs, but even this with this nicely integrated style rubber strap here, you can see it's just a little bit more sleek, a little bit more low profile, and of course it is quite modern and sporty. But you could also put this on a leather strap, on a NATO strap, and really dress it down. And thanks to that nice thin profile, I think that it wears quite well, and I don't think I've seen anybody else really on YouTube even review this piece, and I think it's cool, and I'm surprised considering that this was something that Worn and Wound Creative Services had their fingers in. Of course, they know wristwatches, so I think this is a very, very cool one from them, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else they can bring. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get these next to each other, because right now, currently, the kind of cool thing is there's a lot of brands that are sizing up. So I think it's kind of cool to still see stuff that isn't necessarily, vintage inspired, right? It makes sense to see the vintage inspired watches still coming out in smaller sizes. But for those of you that want a modern watch, but that just wears a little bit, more on kind of that mid-size playing field, then I think these are two options that you could really enjoy, especially if you have a smaller wrist, or if you have maybe a medium to larger wrist, but you just prefer smaller wearing watches. I think these are two really fantastic options. Now, in terms of some of the differences here, they're different types of watches, so I don't think it's really, we don't need to get into comparing every aspect. But when you think about some of the cost savings, Miyota 9015, 42-hour power reserve, Sellita SW200, Swiss Movement, 40-hour power reserve, so slightly shorter power reserve. But in terms of like the loudness of the rotor and whatnot, the winding action, that SW200 typically is going to be pretty impressive. Not that the 9015 is a slouch by any means. When it comes to variants and whatnot and everything like that, it's just, they're as susceptible to that as anybody, especially when you're not getting any type of agreement or guarantee in terms of timing. So, they both have a relatively wide, beat errors and everything like that. I shouldn't say beat errors, but just timing tolerances in general. But with that said, let's actually get them on the wrist and see how they wear. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, or 19 centimeters circumference, this wears really well. Again, I think really well balanced, just a hair under full sized. And I think some people are going to say, no, this just wears perfectly. But I will say, in the reality of, my full form, at 5'11", it's not the largest wearing watch, especially when you consider the fact that, it's even quite thin at just 11.7 millimeters. But, again, I'll say that, it does have a nice bit of heft and kind of course, that industrial design aesthetic, very angular. But I mean, when I start thinking about how just comfortable this is, everything that it offers, it just checks every box for not a lot of money, especially when you start comparing it to the likes of brands like Zen, right? So there are, of course, quite a few brands, that are out there that this would compare really well against in terms of its spec, right? And the fact that it is a German-made brand. But at the same time, just as a wristwatch, I think this thing is a whole lot of fun. Of course, if you're going to compare it to a more mainstream, just everyday brand, like something like, let's say, Zelos, they are going to be probably a couple of leagues ahead in terms of bang per buck when you think about specs, right? But you're not going to get the German design language. You're going to get the Zelos language, which people like, and I should say people love. It's an addictive brand that I've featured many times on the channel. But if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to notice a fair amount of perspective distortion. It's going to make the sides of my wrist just kind of fall away, and then it's going to make the top a little bit more bulbous, which is making the watch case head much larger looking. So I'll keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame so that you can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a true aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And I think it wears fantastic. I love that dial texturing there, 20 millimeter lugs, but with a fully articulated bracelet with toolless micro adjustment, beautiful bevels, and fantastic finishing, and of course that hard coating as well. It's really hard for me to even think about getting this off of the bracelet, although with its titanium construction, I'm sure this would be fantastic on a myriad of tactical straps. Now, the same, or I should say very similar, could be said for this because it's just a very sleek, slim model, guys. I mean, it's about a millimeter thinner, but it has, a couple of extra features. Look at the other finishes that are on there, right? That mixture, even getting some black coating on that knurled fixed bezel there as well. So this one is just a really nice little sweetheart kind of proposition where size-wise, it's very low slung, very nice on the wrist in terms of comfort. There was definitely a clear effort made when it comes to the ergonomics and wearability of the piece, but you're still going to get enough little visual interest points to where I think it's still quite impressive. And again, if this was made by somebody that wasn't AVI-8, or even just branded by somebody that wasn't AVI-8, you would probably be paying a lot more money for something like this when you consider the spec. So yeah, at under $500, this is very, very competitive, and I think it wears really well. You even get a very nicely multiple finished pin buckle there, which is quite nice. I'd say though the strap can be, it's not quite a dust magnet, but it's not quite as resilient to dust as I would have preferred. But you can see there a little bit of air and you can get most of it off. But I think this is one that I love that with this strap, it can feel very casual, very sporty, and very dedicated to adventure, but you could easily swap it up and dress it up when it comes to the straps, because you do have these nice angular turn down lugs that do sweep and look quite nice. But with that said, let's actually get these off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Okay, yes. All right, now the Dievas, that is crazy loom. It's one of the best looms that I've ever had on the channel, and it's not just because there's the most of it, because I probably do have some watches that have more loom than that, and featured watches definitely that have, full loom dials and everything, but the actual application here is done to a very, very high standard. But unfortunately for the AVI-8, it's paling physically in comparison there, just because it's just not to the same caliber. But again, some folks don't need all of that loom, and some people don't even want it. I mean, there's plenty of folks that, again, they see diminishing returns when they're looking at an Omega, at an Oris, at even a Seiko. There are people that kind of stay away because they don't want to pay for anything but the features of the watch. So here, of course, I think you still get a great bang per buck in terms of the feature set at both of these price points. One just under 1,500, one just under 500. But I always like to work in a bit of a low light transition because you're always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And again, guys, full reviews for both of these watches in the channel history. So if you really want to get into the details of either, feel free to. But I just saw these. I do enjoy a good pairing, seeing things next to each other, giving you an idea of scale, giving you an idea of how things wear, how things look. It's something that you can't normally get, especially with these smaller independent brands. So very, very cool. Some of you might even be saying, oh, the AVI-8's not an independent brand. It's part of a group. All right. Don't murder me over the semantics of the categorization here. But yeah, I think these are both fantastic. So much so that, who knows, maybe I'll even give them a little supercharge for you so you guys can really enjoy. Again, look at that. The initial brightness. Very impressive. Of course, the camera is going to do things to try to offset that and balance and make everything okay. So don't be alarmed there. It doesn't fade super fast. It's just, kind of the nature of the beast. But I love that you can still see the crispy 3D nature in the dark there of those indices. So very, very cool. I like both of these watches. Again, I think they represent similar propositions, but just at different price points and different ends of the spectrum and different values, because some people, will value that German branding. Some people will value the, the more, I guess, niche branding of the AVI-8, maybe in the association with Worn & Wound. So there's a lot of different ways that could go. And I think both of them are, again, ultimately two just gorgeous watches, and really a treat to admire them here in the metal. So for me, guys, this isn't really a versus. This was really me just giving you guys a little bit of a showcase here of two watches that I've reviewed on the channel in the past that I think go really well together. You could have a 2-watch collection. These are watches that I could imagine, being people's signature everyday watches, or even worn as kind of a set when somebody says, look, I don't want to spend a ton of money, but I do want to have all the features that I need. And here you're going to kind of get a little bit of everything. And of course, they could stand alone as a singular kind of 1-watch signature collection there. If you are into that, everybody loves a good kind of, that tactical type of styling. So I think that these watches honestly really sing when it comes to collectors. And I think casual, even non-enthusiasts are going to find reasons to be fascinated by either of these offerings. And yeah, also, why not do another video of these? Because I don't see these promoted enough on YouTube. I'm not saying you need to buy them, but I would love for you to have the options, because I know what it's like to pull the trigger on one watch and then I find out about another one that's kind of a better one, the version of it, not too long after. So I just want to do my part to help you guys out, because not everybody has access to brands the way that I have access to brands. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like. And if you already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.